You are listening to the Julie Parker Practice Success Podcast, where you discover management insights and strategies for your successful dental practice. There are also interviews with key people in the industry who have advice and services to help you and your team achieve great success. Welcome to this episode of the Julie Parker Practice Success Podcast. And I can't tell you how excited I am and how interested you should be for our guest today. David Harris from Prosperident. Welcome, first of all. How are you?
I am great, Julie, and so excited to be with you.
I'm delighted. I really am delighted that you responded to my call out for you. And you're coming in from Canada, the east coast of Canada, and in Halifax. So thank you for for remaining open to conversation in the evening when you're supposed to be getting ready for dinner.
Well, there's a little bit of a time difference between us, so I'm glad we could find one that worked.
Fantastic. Well, as I just mentioned to you before, I asked you to be a guest on the podcast because I was listening to another podcast and heard you as a guest. This is such an amazingly important topic. I had no idea it was such an issue to have dental team members steal from their employers. And I know that you've got the figures for Canada or for America, for the United States, and I imagine that they are quite similar here in Australia too. Tell us, what kind of problem is this?
Well, it's a problem that will strike the majority of dentists sooner or later. And you're right, most of the statistics are American. Most of my company's work is done in the US. We do a little bit in Canada and some in Ireland and a bit in Australia. Um, and I haven't seen anything that leads me to believe that there's some kind of regional component to the numbers. So here are the US numbers. And these come from the other ADA, the American Dental Association, which about 4 years ago asked 19,000 of its members a very simple question. Have you been stolen from? And what happened next was, first of all, let's start with the good news. 53% of the respondents said, no, I think I haven't been. And as you can appreciate, Julie, this question doesn't lend itself to absolute answers. You know, it's always based on what the respondent thought happened. So 53% said, no, I haven't been. And of course, that means the other 47% said, yes, I have been stolen from. At which point the American Dental Association asked them a second question. How many times? And now it gets a little bit interesting. So 26% of the total 19,000 who responded said, as far as I know, once. 11% said I've been stolen from twice. 2% were what I think of as the triple dippers, 3 or more times. And the one that really makes me scratch my head is that 8% of the respondents said I've been stolen from at least 4 times. So if you just do a little histogram and you take 26% times once and 11% times twice and 2% times 3 times and 8% times, let's assume just 4 times, what you end up with is that in a room with 100 dentists, there have already been 92 documented instances of employee theft.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
It's crazy. Now, there's also some underreporting. In other words, there are some dentists, undoubtedly, who had been stolen from and didn't realize it. There was another group probably who had been stolen from and for their own reasons chose not to share that with the American Dental Association. So the real number is probably higher than 47%, but unquantifiably so. And of course, the other unknown is how many of this cohort of 100 dentists will be stolen from either for the first time or again in the rest of their careers. So if you were saying to me, well, David, I recently graduated from uni in dentistry, and what are the chances for me in my career? It's probably around 70%.
And that's the key figure, isn't it? What are the chances that it's actually going to happen to me? Because those respondents to that questionnaire as well, they were known cases of stealing. How often would it be happening where it's either small enough or just simply undetected, where it's happened, but you just never knew about it?
Absolutely. And we sometimes investigate, for somebody who has woken up one morning and thought they were being stolen from, and we realized that it had been going on for 6 or 8 years undetected.
And I think that's part of the troubling thing, because a lot of dental, you would have come across a lot of dental practice owners that said, oh no, not my team. But how often do we hear it was the one team member that we would never have assumed would have stolen from us?
We hear that a lot. Now, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that we all have a mental picture of what a criminal looks like. And you're never going to hire somebody who fits that picture. So everybody who steals from you has already been pre-screened through your sort of internal honesty filter. Unfortunately, those filters don't work as well as people might believe. The other thing that happens is that a lot of dentists have a perception of immunity. And when I speak to a live audience, you can always pick these folks out. They're sitting there like that. Arms are folded, faces are tight. Sometimes you can even see them bruxing a little bit. And what it all says is, well, it might be you, and it might be you, but it won't be me. And sometimes I'll single these people out and say, you have immunity face on. How come? And they'll say something like, well, my staff have been with me forever. Or I live in a small town and really embezzlement is a big city problem. And none of those things are true.
Mm-hmm.
Embezzlement happens for one really simple reason. One of your staff decides one day that they're more entitled to your money than you are. And
Yeah.
then from there, it's just a question of how. And that could happen anywhere. And it has nothing to do with the dentist. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter whether you're a general dentist or a specialist. It all happens because one of your staff members develops a feeling of entitlement.
And that feeling of entitlement is enormous, because people will do the thing that's either morally wrong, professionally wrong, criminal in its nature. And then it's human nature then to try to justify that to ourselves. Well, they always ask me to work a little bit overtime and never pay me for it. I always do the shopping for the practice. I'm owed something. And so they can easily justify it, which I suppose then allows them to continue on their stealing path.
You're absolutely right. We all know that stealing is wrong. We learned that from our parents when we were 3 years old. And every thief must rationalize. They must be able to say, I know that in general, it's wrong to take other people's things, but it's okay in this situation because. And then those potential rationalizations you laid out were really good ones. It all comes from either I think this specific person is undercompensating me somehow, or I think society in general doesn't recognize my massive talents, and I'm going to steal what I think I should have as a matter of right.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And going back to your earlier point of that dental practice owner that's sitting in the audience with the arms crossed and the clenching teeth, we think about what it would mean to yourself personally if you were to admit that someone was stealing from you. Is it because I was so stupid, I didn't see it, I was so blind? It's a self-reflection that makes you feel uncomfortable about that, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm going to talk about North American dentists where the bulk of my experience is, but I don't think the Australian culture is very different in this way. Dentists all come from a climate of accountability where they've been conditioned since the moment they stepped into their professional education that whatever happens in their practice is their fault. Regardless of how much or how little control they could have had over that event. And in a clinical sense, I understand it completely. I mean, if a patient is in a dental chair in a surgery and they choose that moment to have a heart attack, the dentist should be rightly judged on how well they respond to that. On the other hand, they have to delegate administrative functions in order to be able to use a handpiece at all. And it's a little bit unrealistic to hold that area to the same standard, and yet that's what they want to do. So you're absolutely right. There are feelings of shame. I get a lot of people who call me and they're distraught. They typically every couple of weeks, I have somebody calling me in tears because that person trusted, that person they've grown very close to, almost view as family, has cynically used that trust as a stick with which to beat the dentist.
Mm. Yeah. And that feeling of, gosh, if I wrongly had faith in this person, then who else am I wrongly having faith in as well? And you can end up with quite a jaded view of your team members, and then that is can either become a self-fulfilling prophecy, or you are tainting everyone with a bad brush, and they're not always going to be like that. So just moving back to Prosperident, this is your prosperident.com is the website. This is your company that purely just focuses on embezzlement for dental practices. How did that come about?
It's a good story, and I'd like to tell you that I saw an opportunity and I went after it. The truth is a little more haphazard than that. I I had an early eviction from high school. I wasn't much of a student, and I ended up joining the army because it sounded a lot better than the alternative, which was prison. And I thrived in the army in a way that I really didn't expect to happen. And eventually, they sent me away to university, and I ended up being slightly educated. Um, when my army service was up, I went to work for a bank. I lasted a couple of years. I got very frustrated and quit because this bank insisted on making the same mistakes over and over again. There was just an institutional inability to learn. So I had quit my job. I moved back to my hometown. I was sitting home. This was in the middle of August, which of course is our summer. And this was 1989. There was nothing good on television. And of course, there was no Netflix or video recorders or anything like that. So I was just completely bored. And my phone rang, and it was a guy I'd been in high school with for my brief stay there who had become a dentist. And he said to me, I think my front desk person is stealing from me. And David, I have no one else to call. So I felt a little sorry for him, and I was kind of excited to have some relief from the tedium I was experiencing. So I said to my friend, okay, I will meet you tonight at your practice after it closes. So I went over that night. This was 1989 BC, in other words, before computers. So it was the old pegboarder one right system that they used to use before there was such a thing as practice management software. And in those days, the amount that each patient owed was recorded on something called a ledger card, and there was typically a tub full of these cards in every practice. So I got in there, and he shoved these cards at me, and I said, "Well, actually, I think we're going to approach this a little bit differently. Can you please show me where the person you suspect works?" So he took me over to her workstation, and I started going through her drawers. And in the meantime, my friend is kind of going bug-eyed, saying, "Are you actually allowed to do this?" And I explained to him that it's not actually her desk, it's your desk that she works at, and you own the desk and its contents. So anyway, what I found, Julie, taped underneath one of the drawers was what we call in the trade her cheat book. Thieves who are adulterating the accounts of the practice have to keep track somehow of what's real and what's fiction.
Mm.
Um, and in 2023, or 2024, that's more likely to be a spreadsheet on their computer. But in 1989, it was an old-fashioned notebook. So I found the notebook, and the whole thing kind of um, came unraveled fairly quickly after that.
Wow, way.
So my friend was not happy that he'd been stolen from, but he was glad that I found it. And he imposed one more favor on me. He said, "Would you mind coming back in the morning? Because I'm going to fire her, and I'd prefer not to do that alone." Okay, I'm probably going to be as bored tomorrow as I am today. Sure. So I went to his practice the next morning. We fired this woman. My friend promised to buy me dinner that I'm still waiting for 34 years later. I've kind of given up on that one. And I kind of shrugged my shoulders and walked away. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but I didn't really see a career opportunity for myself. 2 weeks later, lightning struck. And what happened was I had an appointment at my own dentist's office. And imagine the bolt of electricity that ran through me. I had my hand on the front door and I was about to go in. And I looked through the glass panel in the front door of my dentist's office. And what I saw sitting at my front desk, at his front desk, was the same woman I helped fire 2 weeks earlier.
Oh my God.
Yes, what I said next was far less polite than that. I ran to a pay telephone because in those days you didn't carry a mobile with you. And I called the practice and I used a little bit of deception to get past the gatekeeper and talk to my dentist. And I told him about the time bomb ticking at his front desk. And he panicked and hired me. And that was my first client.
Wow. Gosh.
So
What a
that's how I
story.
got
That
started.
is really quite extraordinary. I can't even imagine if she'd seen you walk in. Oh my God, he was there just a couple of weeks ago firing me. That's just extraordinary. And so that triggered this pathway. And so was it something that got you became busy quite swiftly and started to realize what a huge problem this was?
Sort of. By the time I finished working for my dentist, the local rep from Henry Schein had realized what I was doing. And he had a couple of other dentists that he had concerns about. So I got introduced to them and pretty quickly I was in business. In those days, the real limiting factor of this work was that you had to be physically present on site. So that, for the most part, kept me in a fairly small geographic radius. And then as practice management software slowly replaced the old manual systems, and then once practices started connecting themselves to the internet, that's really what prompted the explosive growth that we had.
It's
Because
going to be one of my
then
questions.
you could investigate from anywhere.
Yeah, that's it. And it was going to be one of my questions of because I remember working at a dental practice decades ago, back before BC as well, before computers, and they had told me about a historical event of a trusted team member who had been found to be stealing from the practice. It was alerted to the practice owner by one of the patients, and it was discovered that when on the fraudulent receipts that she was giving out to patients, it was in a different penmanship. And so they went through physically every single file looking for this different penmanship. However, is it more difficult or easier, or not the case in either way, to steal from an employer now, given everything's digital, even we're paying just by waving our phones over a terminal?
Every technological advance opens up new doors for an investment. And um, back in the old manual system days, you just said it. You had clues like the handwriting involved. You knew who made every entry in your book because you recognized their handwriting. And in those days, you were looking at the dentist, the practice owner was looking at transactions. Now, what you look at is reports, and reports are by definition an abstraction of transactions.
Yeah.
So, what really happened as practices computerized was that the doctor moved further and further back from the information.
Yes. Yeah,
And
that's
then
right. Because they end up getting these reports, but it's already doctored by then.
that's right. And, it was, you certainly saw stealing back in the days of manual systems, but the kind of dollars that we see today just didn't happen, even adjusting for inflation. A 20 or $30,000 embezzlement was massive in the manual days. And about once a year, we see $1 million theft.
I was looking at your shame file on your website and I was astonished that there's been a couple of employees that you've investigated and they were stealing very close to and just over $1 million. How on earth does that happen?
Thieves are good at finding the pain point. In other words, they start small and they slowly increase the amount they're stealing each month, and they kind of reach a point where it's still under the doctor's radar. And if you stole $6,000 a month over an extended period of time, it will add up to a massive sum. And in a lot of practices, somewhere between 2 and 4% of what the office collects is sort of where they end up once the thieving pattern matures.
I've just got so many questions to ask you. I hope I can get through them all in our time frame. But I do want to see if you're happy to share any, particular story that you've been exposed to that you think is a useful one to mention.
Oh gosh,
Many
there
of them.
are a lot. Maybe the best way to approach this is for me to talk a little bit about life from the thief's perspective and how they look at if thieves are parasites, the dentists are their hosts. So how, how does the parasite size up the host? Um, I'm sure your audience all know about practice management software, and practice management software basically tracks three things. It tracks the dollar amount of fees charged, it tracks the amount of money paid to the practice, and it tracks these things called adjustments. And adjustments are kind of non-monetary changes to a patient's balance. If I'm a thief, Julie, and you're a dentist, the first question I'm going to ask is this. So the software tracks how much money gets paid to the practice today, and then that amount should go into the bank. Does Dr. Parker compare the collections according to software with the deposits according to the bank? And I don't have good numbers for the Australian experience. I can tell you in North America that the answer to that question is no about 80% of the time. In other words, the doctor does not do that comparison. And that comparison used to be easy 20 or 5 or 30 years ago, but now with the number of different ways that a practice gets paid and also some time delay involved in some of them, that daily comparison is much more difficult. And a lot of doctors have just kind of abdicated and they don't try. So if I'm a thief and that's the environment, stealing is incredibly simple. I don't have to do anything exotic in practice management software to cover the money I stole. If $32,400 is collected by my practice today, and I can hand over to you $31,600 and you blithely go and deposit it in the bank thinking that you have all the money you're supposed to, that's what I'm going to do. Stealing, once I start doing things that make patient accounts inaccurate, is much more challenging. So that's the starting point. If you're listening to this and you're a practice owner and you just had this sudden rush of blood to your heart and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that is a big hole in my practice, you're right. My suggestion would be, though, that rather than try to check the balancing daily, that you do it once a month. What makes this oversight challenging is timing differences, and I'm going to make an assumption that I hope is correct. In North America, when a patient pays by credit card today, the practice management software captures that as a payment today, but the money doesn't hit the doctor's bank account for a couple of days. Is that also the case where you are? Right. And for that couple of days, the accounts are sort of out of balance until the settlement happens. And that's what makes it challenging. If you look at only one day at a time, it could be that 60 or 80% of the transactions that took place that day have a time offset. On the other hand, as you widen the window and you look at a month at a time, now the only time offset that you're concerned about is the stuff that overlaps the first day of the month and the stuff that overlaps the last day of the month.
Yeah.
In other words, if something is charged to a credit card on the 12th and it settles on the 14th, when you look at the whole month, that is no longer a timing difference. That is kind of self-corrected.
And when you're tracking that every month, you get a strong sense of that little area of that range, that as long as it's generally this amount of money, then we're good to go.
My approach is a little bit different because if what we're doing is looking at timing differences at the beginning or the end of the month, they kind of self-correct the following month. So let's assume that this month the only timing difference we have is that a patient comes in on the last day of the month and they have $4,000 of treatment they pay by credit card. So this month, we're going to see collections according to practice management software greater than bank deposits by $4,000. The first or second day of the next month, that payment comes in. So now when we look at the next month, we're going to start that month with a $4,000 bank deposit with no offset in practice management software. So what I tell people to do is to look at the variance each month and plot it. And when you look at the scatter plot over time, if what you see kind of looks like a sine wave, then that's timing. On the other hand, if what you see has an increasing slope over time, that's not timing anymore. There's something else causing the discrepancy between collections and deposits. So if you want kind of a simple way to examine it, that's how you do it. And what we use is a 6-month cumulative. So each month you add the newest month and you subtract the oldest month from your running balance, and that's the one that you measure the slope of. And as I say, if that slope is increasing over time, it's not timing causing it, it's something else. And the something else may well be theft.
Yes, and it is going to be the systems that you put in place that are going to help make sure that this, and I think putting the systems in place is effective for a couple of reasons. Number one, if the money that the practice has taken and the money going into the bank, that's one thing to track. However, if you are not putting a system in place where any refund to a patient, or I should say discount to a patient, any account adjustments before the actual payment takes place, if that's not password protected and trackable, then that's another system to put in place. And quite often we can be forgiven for wanting just life to be a little bit more efficient. So why bother with the passwords? I trust my people, but don't fall into that trap, because you don't want to be years down the track listening to a conversation with you, David, and think, oh my God, and have that blood drain from your face and think, oh my God, I think that I might be in trouble here because I'm not actually tracking all of these things. And so do make sure you're putting in all the appropriate security measures in place, and then a system of tracking to be able to make sure that you can always say at any given time, I track things well enough that I know that stealing is not happening in this practice. But the second aspect to that is you are creating an environment where security is obvious, that tracking is obvious. And so if you ever did have a team member, existing or new, that thought, I wonder if I can get away with this, no, the eyes are on me. They're on all of us. They're on all of our banking side of things, the financial interactions here. I don't think I'd be able to get away with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So first question I ask, and I'm just going to take what you said a minute ago and turn it around slightly. The first question a thief asks is, does somebody monitor collections versus deposits? And if the answer is no, that's how I'm going to steal. What if the answer is yes? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something that will make my practice management software lie about how much money came in.
Yeah, nice.
And there are lots of ways to do that. I'm not going to get specific here because I may end up educating the wrong person in my rush to share knowledge. So we won't do that, but there are lots of ways in practice management software that I can make it deceive my doctor about how much money came in. And you mentioned one important part of the protection, and that's using the security features that are in the practice management software. The problem with that thinking is this: if I'm a thief and my login permissions will not let me do what I want to do to steal, the next thing I'm going to think about is, okay, how do I get administrator rights in software? For example, can I figure out what Dr. Julie Parker's username and password are? Well, the username I know, the password in software, because of course, if I log in as her, then all of the barriers that she's erected around me magically disappear, and I can do whatever I want. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, how hard would it really be in most practices for staff to acquire the doctor's password?
Easy. Easy.
Well, we have a rule in North America that general dentists type with 2 fingers and specialists type with 3. And And if that applies in Australia, then I think the answer should be obvious. But there are also technical means people use, things like keyloggers, which keyloggers are a device you plug into a computer that captures all the keystrokes. So the next step, the defense against this, first of all, doctors need to guard their passwords very carefully and change them regularly, because if their password is compromised, it's the change every 60 days that will limit the damage. Um, the next thing they need to do is they need to print their own reports. Allowing anybody to hand a report to you is abdicating the ability to control the parameters under which that report is generated. And we see a lot of selective reporting. And the final thing you do after you print your own report at the end of the day, as trite as this sounds, is look at
Yeah.
it.
Not
The
just a
idea of
glance.
throwing it in your inbox and going home and resolving to look at it sometime later will sooner or later get you in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure. With the many cases that you've seen, are there any red flags in terms of behavior or characteristic types, the kind of the non-financial data driven bits and pieces that people can be a bit aware about?
There certainly are. And let me give a little bit of context for this. One of the studies that was done on embezzlement asked the victims what prompted discovery. And there were a lot of different potential answers to that, but I kind of distilled them down to two categories, being financial indicators of embezzlement and behavioral indicators. And when I did that, Julie, what I found was that 67% of the embezzlements had been detected by behavior and only 33% by some kind of financial anomaly. So
Gosh.
you are absolutely onto something. So let's ask ourselves what sort of behaviors thieves exude when they're stealing. And I'll give you a few. There are a lot more, but let's hit the highlights.
Mm,
One that shows up over and over again is territoriality. And by that, I mean possessiveness about their duties. It might even extend to their workspace. I mean, these are the people who will get upset if somebody else sits at their desk or touches their computer.
okay.
Um, the cousin of territoriality is a huge reluctance to cross-train anybody to do any part of their job. Because if I'm a thief, I need to guard that magic combination of jobs that allows me to both steal and hide the fact that I did it. And when you come to me as my boss and say, David, you're run off your feet, I'm going to take the processing of payments off your plate and I'm going to give that to one of your team, or one of your coworkers. I mean, my heart skips a beat, because how will I steal if they're doing that and I'm doing other things? So that's part of it. Another very simple part is thieves like to be alone when they steal. Part of it is that they don't want to be observed, and part of it is that stealing takes concentration. And it's hard to concentrate when the phones are ringing and you've got staff and patients wandering around the place, and um, so on. So thieves tend to get there before everybody else in the morning, or maybe they stay late, or maybe they just quietly show up in the practice on the weekend to catch up on stuff. And that's the time they do their deed. Another characteristic is thieves are very concerned about the possibility of outsiders in the practice. And the word that can really strike terror into a thief is consultant. Why? Because the doctor's under their spell. This is the person who makes the practice owner's life easier. And that influences their evaluation of the trustworthiness of this person. On the other hand, a consultant comes in who is not beholden to the thief at all, and who thinks about dentistry as a business first and a healing art second. That's a huge threat.
Yeah.
So when the doctor says to the staff, great news, we've got a fantastic consultant coming in, and there's one staff member who's visibly a lot less happy about this than everybody else, that's a warning sign.
Goodness me. Gosh. Gosh, all of this is making sense. That would make sense. I'm trying to put myself into the position of someone who's stealing, and you would, every time someone will walk past, you think, oh, they're going to ask me what I'm up to or what my task is. What can I help you with? And I'll be like, no, 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 no. So it all makes absolute sense. For if you, for whatever reason, you think, yes, stealing is happening here, and I know who's doing it. For a start, you don't want to, if it's just because of the password stuff, if someone's had a password stolen, you can't just naturally assume it is that person. You might possibly need a little bit more proof than that, but to make sure that the person hasn't just stolen, that their password wasn't stolen. But if you are in a position that you think, yes, I'm being stolen from, I'm pretty sure it's that person. We have legal ramifications, people getting upset on site in front of patients' ramifications. We need to protect existing team members, ourselves, the patients. What is the management? What's the first step? Do we just call somebody like yourself and be directed from there?
That's the moment when you need expert help and you need it right now. And I see people make a few mistakes there. The first one is they fire this person sort of without any substantive evidence. And, first of all, if it's a long service employee, there's the potential of some kind of wrongful termination and legal consequences from that. Secondly, I assume Australia is no different than North America in the sense that it is really challenging right now to find good, experienced employees. And if you fire somebody because you think they're stealing and they're not, you've just gotten rid of probably a decent employee who's going to be difficult to replace. And you have to deal with that. There are a lot of missteps that people make, and they need expert advice and they need it right now. The other mistake people make is they confuse somebody who knows 20% more than they do with an expert. And I have seen a lot of dentists who think they're being stolen from go to their accountant, their cousin who's a lawyer, a trainer for their practice management software. I mean, they go to somebody who has more contact with embezzlement than they do, but not enough to be a legitimate expert. And there are mistakes made there, and they can be costly in all kinds of ways. So at the moment you suspect, what I'd encourage you to do is refrain from taking any action whatsoever. Get expert help and let them guide you. I had a call a little while ago. This came in on a Friday evening, and it was from a dentist in the U.S. who kind of woke up Friday morning and thought she was being stolen from. Their office was closed on Fridays. So by the time she talked to me, she had already gone into the practice management software and locked it down. In other words, she had changed all of the user permissions in the software. And I said, I have some bad news for you. What I need you to do now is get back in your car, go back to your office, and undo everything you just did. Because what I want is that when that employee comes in on Monday morning, I want everything to be exactly as it was left on Thursday. And dentists have this quick fix mentality. I mean, they're looking at a patient in a hygiene chair and they see caries in the mouth. And what's going through the dentist's mind is, do I have any place I can put them today and get this fixed? That's how they think. And it's a great concept to have in a clinical sense. But when we're dealing with an issue like embezzlement, we need to be a lot more patient and, do what makes sense as opposed to what I think I should be doing right now.
Mm. You would have come across a lot of, or all of the reactions of the team members that are found out and seen the ramifications of a badly managed situation, I imagine.
I have, and sometimes people will even do something absolutely outlandish. Um, I had a call from a dentist once, and he suspected embezzlement in his practice, and we probably talked for 45 minutes or an hour. And at the end of that conversation, he decided he could save some money if he did his own investigation instead of hiring us. And I forget the fee quoted for this, but it was probably $7,000 or $8,000. So he decided, if I can conquer dental school, surely I can do my own investigation of stealing. Julie, I don't know exactly what he did next, but he tipped the suspect off to the fact that she was under suspicion. Probably he asked her for a bunch of reports from the software he never asked for before, and then he went in his private office and closed the door and got on the phone with his accountant or something like that. And of course, if you're stealing, you're hyper perceptive and you're,
Yeah.
every morning when the doctor comes in, you're kind of looking them in the eyes and saying, does she know? So the doctor tipped the thief off to the fact that she was about to get caught. And her response was to come back to the practice that night with a can of petrol and burn it down.
Oh, oh, wow. Just burn the evidence down, what she thought.
Yeah, to destroy the evidence, and also I guess to give him a bigger problem than her.
Yeah. Gosh.
And that probably cost him, even after considering what he would recover from insurance,
Mm,
that probably cost him $150,000 because he didn't want to have an undetectable investigation. When we do an investigation in a practice, we can do it on staff who are working there, and they will have no clue whatsoever that
mm,
we're on the job. I mean,
yeah.
our footprint in the practice is exactly zero.
And you don't want to give the thief also time to come up with all the good stories and reasons why I stole. To be able to get
Yeah,
them
there's
in the moment and see what comes out of their mouth, I imagine that's more
that.
ideal.
Well, I mean, I'm not terribly interested in what comes out of their mouth because we're data people and we tend to gather our evidence from practice management software. Sometimes if a thief confesses it makes us feel good, and if we catch it on video, it makes for interesting television. But other than that, we are not the least bit dependent on getting a confession from a thief. We have lots of better places to gather evidence. So that's not my concern. But what I don't want is somebody getting the idea that if they destroy the evidence that they will walk away from this. And as I say, that's doctor who tried to save himself $8,000 cost himself probably 20 times that. Simply because he may have been a fabulous dentist, but as an embezzlement investigator, he didn't rate very highly.
It's too big a deal with too many complexities and too many unknowns to just do it yourself. Do you get the experts in? That's for sure. Because we're not talking always just a few $1,000s. We're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. By the looks of your website, there are enormous sums being stolen.
The average amount that we see stolen is just over $100,000.
As
And
average.
um, all of the numbers I've given you are American dollars, but
Mm.
I don't think the conversion to Australian dollars is going to change things very much.
Yeah, that's right. And the repercussions for the team members, we're talking criminal investigation and possibly jail time.
We pretty much every week or 2 weeks, one of our alumni, as we lovingly call them, goes to prison.
It's just, I had no idea this was such an enormous problem. And what a, I'm not quite sure what the legal process is. Is there compensation? Does a practice who has lost on average over $100,000, do they see that money again?
They all see some of it. Whether somebody recovers 100% or 60% or 20% depends on a lot of factors. Um, and again, I think this is also true in Australia. Practices in North America have insurance coverage for this. And here, the default amount of coverage is $25,000, which, based on what I just told you about how much is stolen, doesn't go very far. But 25,000 is kind of the 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 insurance amount that's low hanging fruit. I mean, that's easy to get paid. Um, Beyond that, it depends on a few things. The first is the thief's ability to pay, and some thieves come up with the money, or they have a father or somebody who's got deeper pockets who will put up some money so their darling daughter doesn't have to go to prison. Um, and also in North America, and again, I think this is equally true in Australia. A lot of stealing happens now when people take checks payable to the doctor and they cash them at their own bank. And here, the banking law makes that the bank that cashes those checks responsible for it. And if that's the case, the good news is the banks are certainly able to pay a doctor back $100,000, whether or not the thief can. In other words, that creates a transference of the loss from the doctor to the bank, which I'm just fine with.
Mm, mm. That's it. That's it. What's been your experience of the post emotional mindset state of the victims of this and their teams?
It's difficult, and dentistry can be a stressful profession on a good day, and this will not be a good day.
No.
Um, what I what I tell a dentist who's been stolen from is, it's unfortunate that it's happened to you. However, we've managed to stop the bleeding, and your profitability and your well-being from here on in should be better. The other thing about stealing is it creates a lot of drama in the office. Um, the thief has an agenda that nobody else knows about, and that distorts a lot of the things they do. And they, in various ways, they will focus on what makes them the most money as opposed to what's in the overall best interest of the practice. So you remove that cancer from the practice, and suddenly everybody will be getting along better, and the practice will be making more money, and the sun will come out and the clouds will go away. But in the moment, I've had many devastated dentists. Some of them have even stopped practicing because they've said that, I just didn't have that fire in my belly anymore.
Gosh. There's such a strong sense of betrayal, especially if it's happened with somebody who's been a long term employee, I imagine.
It absolutely has. I spoke years ago at a conference, and two dentists. It was in a small town. Two dentists came up to me after. They were the only two dentists in the town in which they lived, which was maybe 15 miles from where I spoke. And they were, the only two dentists in town. So they were fishing friends and social friends. And they'd both been embezzled. And they came up to me after. One of them was describing what it felt like for him to be stolen from. And he said, it's like I went away for the weekend, and when I got back, somebody had broken into my house, taken my things, and peed on my carpets.
Yeah.
And the other guy corrected him. He said, no, that's not quite it. It's like you went away for the weekend, you came back, and your house was robbed and your carpets were ruined. And then a few days later, you were walking your dog through your neighborhood, and you looked into your neighbor's window and you saw the painting that used to be in your living room hanging in his house. In other words, there are two types of crime. There's the type where somebody smashes the window of your car and, steals your purse or your laptop or whatever out of
Mm,
it.
mm.
And you have no idea who it was, and you probably will never see them again. And then there's crime by somebody you've chosen to trust and you've welcomed into one of the most sacred places in your life, being your practice.
Mm.
And one of those is a lot more injurious to your well-being than the other.
Yeah, yeah. And I imagine we have to go through those, the stages of grief. In essence, we have to go through that, denial of it and acceptance of it. But also, it is a space where you will develop better systems because of it. You would have gotten rid of that cancer. And you would have made sure that it's then affecting your team management, recruitment, and things moving forward. You regain a sense of control over everything as an owner and as a team as well. You've reestablished your relationships with everyone. It can be one of those things that make us stronger rather than destroy us completely. And I suppose that's one of the goals.
And that's a role that somebody outside the practice, like a consultant or a coach, can play a vital part in as well. Because a lot of times the office needs some kind of refocusing and some some outside direction to get them back into the right groove.
That's right. So if we have any dentists that are now thinking, oh, I think I better have a look at this area just to make sure everything is on the up and up, or there could be people out there that are suspecting that this is actually happening in their practice right now, Prosperident does do work with Australian dental practices. Fantastic.
We certainly do.
What's their best next step?
The best way to reach us is to go on our website, which is www.prosperident.com. And there's a menu item called Contact Us, and you can fill that in, and we'll get back to you. We typically will, when somebody wants to speak with us, we'll send them an appointment booking link, and we do offer some hours that would overlap with a dentist availability in most parts of Australia. Perth is always a little challenging, but we can find a way. And we find that overlap time. We have a Zoom conversation, and if an investigation needs to happen, we have full capability to carry it out in Australia.
Wonderful, wonderful. Is there anything that I haven't asked that is pertinent, that's still in your mind that we should be sharing?
No, this was a great conversation. I will leave your audience with a couple of things. The first is that, as we talked about, at some point in your career, this will probably happen to you. It doesn't have to be either financially or emotionally devastating for you. If you recognize what's going on early and you get the right help and you get the problem terminated when it's a $5,000 or a $10,000 issue as opposed to a $100,000 issue, that is not a defeat. That is an overwhelming success. So let's get in front of this problem, and putting your head in the sand is not going to make the world any sunnier a place when you pull your head back out.
Yeah, that's true.
The other thing I'll mention, Julie, is that we've been talking about investigation, and that's the majority of what we do. The fastest growing part of our business is proactivity, and that's where we work with dentists to put the systems in place and to teach them how to be practice owners in a financial sense, as opposed to us waiting until they've been victims and then coming behind them with a broom and a dustpan and sweeping up the mess. So if a dentist is hearing this and says, yeah, I'd like to, rather than wait to be embezzled, I'd like to put the right protections in place, we'd love to have that conversation.
That is a very powerful conversation. And I do encourage all listeners and viewers to reach out to you and make sure that this area of your business is being managed very well and you've got control over it. We need control over every aspect of our business, this one included. I thank you so much, David. It's been such an enlightening conversation, such an important conversation, and I appreciate you coming on as a guest so very much.
It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this podcast, then I encourage you to head over to Amina and my website, dentalbusinessmastery.com.au. You will find all the information that you need if you would like to gain our assistance in helping you and your team achieve great success. We've got online courses, consulting programs, the club membership. We also have a whole bunch of tools and resources that are available for free that will help you achieve your practice goals. If you would like to find out more, you can also email us directly at info@dentalbusinessmastery.com.au. Thanks so much for listening.